Hello, my name is Mardi and welcome back to my channel. You know how sometimes we just read a book and then we try to find somebody else who has read it and we can't find anybody, or we look it up on Goodreads and the ratings are not what we've experienced. That's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to give you recommendations of some books that I thought were amazing but just aren't talked about enough on BookTube. You know, just some unknown book recommendations, and I hope you read them because I don't want to be the only one who knows what's happening. So that's what we're going to do today. Get yourself something to drink because hydration is important. Maybe I should keep that as an intro. And let's just start right away. The first book is actually one that a lot of Germans might know because many of us have to read this for school. I think that school sucks the joy out of the reading experience in many cases. The book I'm talking about is actually a play. It's called Andorra by Frisch. It has been translated into English. All of these books have either been translated or been written in English. And Andorra is actually one of two books that I liked to read in school. It is about Andri, who lives in Andorra. Now, Andorra is not the state that we nowadays know. It's a fictional state in this book, but it is surrounded by a different state, or at least it neighbors a different state that is just called the Blacks during the whole book. I don't think it has anything to do with people of color. Andri lives with his adoptive parents, their daughter, who is his adoptive sister, and their teacher. Andri grows up as a Jew, or at least believing that he is a Jew. He's the only one in Andorra, which is more of a city-state. It's very small. And there's this fear of invasion from the Blacks. The Blacks persecute Jews. As you might see, there are a lot of parallels to the Third Reich, like Germany 1933 to 45. During this play, it actually turns out that Andri wasn't born a Jew. At least that's what the teacher says. However, because he grew up believing he was a Jew, and because everybody else also believed so, Andri still thinks he's a Jew, which makes sense if you think about, you just grow up in a culture. So it's not one of these points where they're like, oh, you're not a Jew, so it's fine. That would be the worst plot twist at this point. No, people still say, yeah, but he grew up as a Jew, so he is a Jew. And I think this very much shows how our prejudices are often based on nothing. During all of this book, you can see a lot of prejudice against Jews. There's obviously anti-Semitism in this book, so if you're sensitive to that, maybe don't read it. You can also see how during a crisis the prejudices worsen because everybody's afraid of being invaded, and they give Andri a lot of blame for things that he actually didn't do. This play also deals with patriotism and with the horrors of impeding wars. It brings up some very important points in our society, even nowadays, even though it was written in the 60s, I think. It's great, it's interesting, it's very sad at times, it's very heartbreaking. I think it deserves a lot more love than it's currently getting. The second book is a book that I've read years ago, but I still remember it so clearly, and it has made such an impression on me. It's called Memoirs of an Imaginary Friend by Matthew Dix. This is a book about friendship and about moving on and about accepting change. It is told by Bodo, who is the imaginary friend of 8-year-old Max. And honestly, I think the idea of telling a story out of the perspective of something that isn't quite human but can still experience human emotions is a very interesting one. An imaginary friend, I never had one as far as I know, but I also never thought about if these actually existed, if they have thoughts of their own. What is their life like, if you can call it that? What are their thoughts? What do they feel and how do they see the world? An important plot point is that Bodo disappears if Max stops believing in him. And Bodo is already 5 years old, which is quite old for an imaginary friend. A lot of them make it only for a day. Bodo doesn't want to disappear. He wants to live. He wants to exist. So he urges Max to not forget him. Max is autistic in the book, or at least it's strongly implied. I don't remember exactly if they say it explicitly. I think Asperger's syndrome is mentioned several times throughout the book, so there is some representation of that. I can't attest to how accurate it is because I'm not autistic myself. Max attends a regular school, not one for people with specific needs. Max is bullied a lot because he's different. He sees the world in a different way. He still has his imaginary friend at 8 years old, and he just is an easy victim for bullying. And I think in this case bullying was actually depicted quite good. Sometimes I feel like books don't get it right. Authors don't get it right. But here I think the author did a great job of describing what bullying feels like from an outsider's perspective, because Bodo is Max's friend and he just sees people bullying Max, but he can't do anything because he is not real in the sense that he could go to these other boys. And then there are obviously the grown-ups who always worry for Max, who can either be very overprotective or don't understand Max at all. And then there's Mrs. Patterson, who is a teacher of Max but develops a very special interest in him due to him being a child with special needs. And it's very heartbreaking what happens in the end and what she does. And I can't recommend it enough that you read this book, because I think it's important to read books about children with special needs, no matter if you know any yourself. It's a story about empathy, it's a story about friendship, even about friendship that might not be good in the end anymore. And it's a story about just life, even if it's just from the perspective of an imaginary friend of an 8-year-old. It's so well written that I was reminded of my own childhood and of all the things that back then I thought were the hardest ever. It was nothing compared to what Max had to go through and what Bodo had to go through as Max's companion. The next book will be a bit less serious, even though I think that serious books are very important. Sometimes it's also just about enjoyment. And the next book is part of an incredible series that I just don't see enough people talking about, even though it's by Joe Abercrombie, who is very famous, at least on the fantasy side of BookTube, because he writes these grimdark stories. But there's this series that is called the Shattered Sea series. The first one is called Half a King. And I think part of the reason why it might not be as popular is because it is marketed as a young adult series. I don't think this is young adult, because this doesn't deal with typical young adult topics, and maybe that's just because the young adult that we see nowadays has changed a lot from a few years back. The only reason I can see why it would be classified as young adult is because the protagonist is a young adult. His name is Yarvi and he's a prince, though not the oldest one, until his family is betrayed by other parts of his family and killed, and he is also left to die. The thing about Yarvi is that he would like to take back the throne, but one of his hands is deformed, and so he can't really fight with a sword and shield. And also he has to find his way back home first, because he is picked up by a ship and becomes a slave. On this ship he finds other people who also, it's this group of people that just aren't likely to find each other, and that also aren't likely to take back a kingdom. But they still want to do it because they become great friends. This is found family trope at its finest. There are some older ones, there are some younger ones. There are no children, but still it's not this group of friends that we sometimes have that just makes sense that they would meet each other. And due to this, they also first have to grow together. They don't just all like each other immediately, and they also have to first free themselves from being slaves. The humor in this book is just amazing. I haven't read any other Abercrombies, but I definitely want to after this one. I also recommend the whole series. Every single book was a 5-star for me. Please go and read it. So, I don't know, I just feel like Abercrombie is such a big name on BookTube, and sometimes I see the books in the background of videos, but nobody ever really talks about them, even though they are amazing. For the next one, I actually would only recommend the first one, because this is also a series, it's a duology. It's called The Last Hours by Minette Waters. This is set in medieval England in a little county, I think, called Devilish, and this follows several characters, one of them being Lady Anne of Devilish, who rules over the castle and the adjoining village while her abusive husband is away. And then they receive message that a strange illness has arrived at England. It's the Black Death. A lot of people have already died, one of them being Lady Anne's husband, and she's a very smart, very educated woman. And so she decides to isolate the village and to invite all of her subjects to the castle so they can sit out this crisis together. A lot of people have to learn to live together who maybe don't like each other, who usually wouldn't meet. For example, Lady Anne's daughter. She's very spoiled. She's a brat, and not in the Charlie XCX kind of way. She's just really annoying at times. Nonetheless, I think her character was very interesting and also important to the story. You also follow some other characters. This is a very character message-driven book, I think. If you're really into stories about people coming together and trying to survive, about history and about not knowing what the future might bring, because they don't know when they can get out again without risking to die. So if you're into that, this is the perfect book for you. There's also a second part. I didn't like it as much, but the first part is definitely worth it, and also they're both not that long, so you can read them quite quickly. Sorry for any background changes. I had to take a short break of 24 hours from filming. The next book I want to talk about is again one that just suffers from being read in German schools. It's called The Physicists by Friedrich Dürenmatt. This is also a play. This is set in a psychiatry led by Mathilde von Zahn, and here we meet three patients. They believe that they are the three physicists Einstein, Newton, and Johann Wilhelm Möbius. Möbius wasn't a real person, though he might have been based on a mathematician whose surname was also Möbius. Möbius has visions of King Solomon. King Solomon is a character in the Bible, for those of you who might not know. And he also believes that he has found something that might destroy the human race altogether. This makes him very paranoid because he believes that the two great powers, I think it is mentioned that these are the United States and the Soviet Union. Möbius believes that these two are after his discovery. And so he doesn't trust the other patients. And then there's also a murder. A nurse is killed. Nobody knows who might have done it, and so a detective is called. The whole play is a bit strange, but I think it's supposed to be this way because it shows you how people can become paranoid, how politics influence science, and how science can influence the world. It asks the question of how far science is allowed to go. But this isn't just a book about morals, it's also about these three patients who distrust each other, and each of them seems insane and just like they have gone totally bonkers. So yeah, this is a very comical book with a lot of interesting themes, like what would the great powers do to win this Cold War? How do you prevent political powers from using discoveries and science to destroy the enemy and thereby the whole world? And I just wish more people would read this outside of school. The last book for today is a non-fiction. I think that non-fiction in general just doesn't get enough love on BookTube or BookTok or Bookstagram. Today I will only tell you one that you should read. Not once did I tell you the name of the author or the book. It's called A Team of Rivals by Doris K. Goodwin. This is a biography about Abraham Lincoln, the I think 17th US president, if I'm not mistaken. He is very well known for being the president during the Civil War in the US. But I think this is also a book that's very interesting to people who are not from the US, because I'm not from there. But I still think that this was a very interesting story to read, or a very interesting biography to read. It spans from his birth to the end of his life, but it's not one of these very dry retellings of a life that you've heard about 1,000 times. At times I felt like I was sitting in a theater watching this life unfold, and it's mind-blowing what a good author can do with a biography. Is it too early for these jokes? It's been 200 years, it's fine. Anyway, those are all the books for now. There are a lot more that I could probably name, but I think that's enough for today. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you very soon.